This is Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Good to have you aboard once again as we pick up on the latest from the grain market scene and comments from Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Dan, following last week's hard winter wheat tour in Kansas, a lot of folks out there were anticipating what the USDA would have to say about the size of the Kansas wheat crop. That was released in its grain supply and demand report, which was out yesterday. And lo and behold, there was quite a gap between the two wheat production numbers, not a small gap at that, and that has prompted a few questions.
The USDA came out yesterday and projected 270 million bushels of wheat production in the state of Kansas in 2018. The wheat tour number was about 243, so about a 30 million bushel difference. The yield figures were almost identical, with the USDA projecting 37.0, and I think that's almost exactly what the wheat tour had projected. So the difference comes in on the harvested acreage number, and that's a head-scratcher as far as the projections there. The USDA projected higher harvested acreage this year than the previous year, up at 7.3 million acres. Well, the implicit number projected by the wheat tour was about 6.6. So in the old vernacular, something's got to give, in terms of what will actually happen. And I think, as I recall, last week coming out of that wheat tour, that, we put a number in at 243, but gosh, there's a lot of short wheat that people were wondering about, whether it'd come through, et cetera. So the 243 could even be questioned. So here you have the Kansas hard red winter wheat number feeding into the national projection for the 2018 harvest, going into the 2018-19 supply-demand balance sheet, all that whole set of ending stocks, projections, price projections, et cetera. So arguably, when the USDA came out here in the May report with their projection for wheat production, we in Kansas could see that, gosh, by 30 million bushels or more, that's probably too high. Mm. And if that be the case, then come the June report, there's probably more adjustments to be made in the wheat supply-demand numbers and I guess all sorts of challenges. And we're kind of balancing that, at least I think, Eric, as we look at the pace of exports for U.S. wheat. What you end up seeing there is a situation where USDA did lower its production estimate by 15 million bushels down to 910 million. But the pace of shipments and what's bought ahead only equates to about 865 million. We've got only about 4 weeks left. Mm-hmm. So you've got kind of a anticipated negative factor coming in yet to the wheat market, and probably a shortfall in this USDA wheat projection that will affect the old crop numbers by 40, 50 million bushels probably. Raise the ending stocks for what we'd see coming out of this marketing year on June the 1st, go into higher beginning stocks for that next marketing year, and basically sort of offset the two impacts. Again, lower exports in old crop coming in with a higher beginning stocks number, production being down by 30, 40 million bushels. And so I think looking ahead to next month, we'll probably have all that much more uncertainty in terms of the U.S. wheat supply-demand balance sheet and price prospects for where the wheat market could go. You could argue that, gosh, they'll probably just offset one another, but if anything, we're just seeing a lack of real credibility. And credibility is the wrong word to use and talk about the USDA numbers, but some real questions to look at, particularly on their harvested acreage assumptions.
But about the USDA's projection on wheat price, where did that end up?
Well, the USDA projected that wheat prices would be in the $4.50 to $5.50 range for this next marketing year, and that would be an average of about $5. This year's average was about $4.70. So when you look at that and compared to where we're at right now in Kansas, we have wheat prices at cash basis at Atchison $4.67, Hutchinson $4.79 to $4.87, Great Bend about $5. A number of places running again $4.80 to just under to about $4.90 or so. So here that the projection we have for the next marketing year of an average of about 5 is about where we're at right now. And, of course, our current cash market is reflecting, I think, these reduced prospects for wheat coming out of central and western Kansas. And with that people are trying to get hold of supplies and be in good position to not be caught short at the mill and even to some degree the export level as we head off into the latter part of 2018.
Well, Dan, delving further into the USDA supply and demand report yesterday on the corn side, what did you see that caught your attention there?
The biggest number was a non-U.S. number. On the world supply-demand balance sheet for corn, there was a drop in the ending stocks projected for next marketing year down to 159 million metric tons. Well, we're so used to dealing with domestic numbers and seeing and thinking in terms of millions of bushels. What's that? That number, that 160, is down from about 195 in this current year that'll be ending August 31st. And the difference is to some degree due to a little bit lower production anticipated. Again, some of that being ours, some of that coming out of some dry conditions in Argentina and Brazil. But at least in this marketing year, that carries over and has an impact on planning decisions next year for those producers. But most of it has to do with just strong total usage. So here we're seeing U.S. corn futures literally from July on all above $4. And we can remember not too far back where we were struggling to even approach that. Well, now they're all solidly above $4.
That's a harbinger of good things for the trade and for producers.
An indication of some concern about ending stocks going forward. So you've got that world number coming in lower. They do also project ending stocks for 2018-19 marketing year at just under 1.7 billion, and we've been running at about 2.2, at times 2.4, 2.5 in this current marketing year. So ending stocks projected to tighten up for corn. And some of that's lower acreage, et cetera. Some of that's pretty strong ethanol usage. We've seen the fuel markets running strong, ethanol production keeping right up with that. So point being that we're seeing now ending stocks of corn in the U.S. projected to be at about 1.7 billion bushels, and that's still with 174 bushel corn yield. Well, anything closer to 170, or heaven forbid, below 170, if you're a user, you're seeing ending stocks then probably get closer to 1.3, 1.4 billion. Ending stocks to use closer to 10 or below, and cash prices instead of at about 380 where the USDA is projecting them, then cash prices start to get towards $4 and above, and futures, of course, with basis adjustments would be higher. So again, we don't anticipate major problems in most of the Corn Belt yet, although we're dry here in Kansas. Mm-hmm. But point being, we're sitting today with a lot riskier situation in terms of having adequate corn supplies to maintain 2 billion bushel plus ending stocks than we were just a matter of months ago. And you add all that together, and we've got a brighter prospect now for corn prices heading off into 2018 and 19 marketing year than we had just 2 or 3 months ago.
And in our remaining time, a quick nod to the soybean numbers in the supply and demand report. Once more, it appears you say that we have seen soybean stocks draw down some from the previous report.
In the U.S. projection, the USDA forecast that ending stocks in this marketing year would be at about 530 million, but for next year at 415 million. So that's a fair drop, over 115 million bushels. And as stocks to use would drop from about 12.7 to below 10. The number that is kind of buried in there that you wonder on is their projection of strong, even stronger exports than this year, from about 2.065 this year up to about 2.3. And what a person wonders about with regard to that is would be the amount of success that we're anticipating that Brazil will have in soybean production going off in the next year, some recovery in Argentina. So I guess, Eric, at least for my part, I raised some questions about whether we'll really see that much of a drop in U.S. soybean ending stocks heading off in the next year. The projection is for $10 soybeans, and that would be welcome. So we're not trying to to hammer that projection down. Again, $10 next year as opposed to $9.35 this year. But gosh, there's some real market realities that have to be dealt with before we can just write that number in, and with a lot of confidence that we will actually achieve a $10 U.S. soybean price heading off into 2018-19.
Yeah. Well, once more, your notes are chock full with information that we weren't able to get around to in our time today, so we'd invite producers to turn to agmanager.info and have a look at those. They're posted now. Lots going on once again this week in the trades. And Dan, we appreciate the update. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
That from Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. As you know, Dan is based in Colby, northwest Kansas, and he's along with us each week to talk grain market developments here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Time aside now for a quick review of several of the agriculture-related actions that were taken by the 2018 Kansas Legislature. It has adjourned now completely for this year. Josh Rowe joining us. He is a Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Kansas Department of Agriculture, and in that capacity, he's right in the thick of what's going on in the Kansas State House. So, Josh, thanks for coming over once again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, for the opportunity here. You know, I really think overall was a very good session for the agricultural industry. Some legislation of note, you know, within the Department of Ag's Division of Animal Health, we have our Animal Facilities Inspection Program, and they're tasked with licensing, inspecting kind of our companion animal industry, you know, all the way from our breeders, boarders, pet shops, entities such as shelters, rescue networks, and that. And we have a team of 3 inspectors that provides this service, and just the levels of fees that the licensees charge for this, we're only supporting about 55% of the program. And so where that kind of comes into play, there's other programs within Division of Animal Health, such as our animal disease control and our brands program that are, you know, 80 to 100% fee funded. So
obviously with direct implications for agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could say that the large animal sector has been paying their fair share of running, you know, the program, but you couldn't really make that argument that the small animal program would. And it's important that, you know, those different parts of the Division of Animal Health are carrying their own weight. And so this legislation adjusted some license categories to make them more self-sustaining, get them around that 80% self-sustaining level. You know, it took some compromise on both sides to get this across the finish line.
But the point here being that with this more equitable balance of support for the programs, that this will help, in fact, bolster the Division of Animal Health's ability to respond to agriculture concerns.
Yeah, that's the whole piece, and that was kind of what's surprising to a lot of different people around the legislative arena when they would see kind of our traditional agricultural groups in there speaking in favor of a bill that has to do with the companion animals. So it's because it's all connected.
Yeah.
So.
Another bill with clear agricultural implications, the noxious weed bill. There was an update to the statutes there. What was that about,
Yeah, so through that, this is another piece of legislation, several years in the making, but under, I guess, current law, the list of weeds that are considered noxious, or a noxious weeds list, they're written in statute. So to get a weed determined noxious or to take it off the list, it literally requires an act of the legislature and the governor signing off on that. And so, which can obviously, sometimes the speed of government that really limits our ability to respond to something that could be moving fast through that. And then also it brings, if you will, I guess, politics into play. And so legislation that was passed takes all those weeds out of statute and puts them within the regulation process. What it creates, what's important, is what's called a Noxious Weeds Advisory Committee that is comprised of scientists, stakeholders, farmers, and those involved that have that really on-the-ground knowledge to make those recommendations to the Secretary of Agriculture about which weeds should be listed on and off. And so it's, I think, a very great step to make this a more science-based process.
And perhaps expedite the process
absolutely.
Of approving new weeds as noxious?
Yeah, absolutely. Can do that, and also gives the Secretary authority also to declare noxious weeds as an emergency status as well. And then obviously a committee of 13 members can respond a lot quicker than the legislators.
Was something else that came up in this legislative session pertaining to water policy? There's always something there about water in Kansas. This one refers to the latitude of water permit holders, something that was established called the multi-year flex account some time back. A change was made there.
Yeah, and so just quick overview, our multi-year flex accounts, or MIFAs, the acronym for that. That allows a producer to kind of just bundle 5 years worth of water use together, and then gives them the flexibility that as long as they stay within that total allocation over the term of 5 years, they can have some flexibility on, pumping, more than their allocation in 1 year or pumping less to respond to that. And just administratively, we'd found that the deadline to apply for a MIFA happened to be October 1. Mm-hmm. And as you know, that tends to be a very inconvenient time of the year. Producers
busy time.
Would much rather be in the combine than they would filling out some paperwork. So we were able to move that deadline to December 31st, so producers have till the end of the year. So a simple but I think very important piece of legislation.
Indeed. There's been interest in the possible production of industrial hemp as a crop here in Kansas. And this was manifested in the form of a bill to look into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of the background of this, the 2014 Farm Bill, it authorizes state departments of agriculture to create an industrial hemp research pilot program. And over 30 states have acted upon that at different varying levels, as we all know, from just allowing very basic research in hemp to, our neighbors to the west that we all know are very different form. They allow industrial hemp plus other forms of the cannabis plant as well. And actually, there's been forms of this piece of legislation in Kansas ever since the 2015 session. And what this will allow, and I need to kind of be clear because we're starting to get a lot of questions, comments, but it will allow us here at KDA to issue licenses for the cultivation of hemp for research purposes.
Stressing those last two words.
For research purposes. And then the other big piece of this bill is it requires us to develop a full rules and regulations process before we can issue a license. So yes, the bill's been signed into law, it's there, but that doesn't mean you can go out and legally plant industrial hemp right now. We're currently going through our rules and regulations process, having our first set of public meetings, and we'll move that process through. That's two things to be clear of, that this is really at this level, we're in accordance with federal law. And also part of the law requires us to create those rules and regulations. It's sometimes the other part of the legislative process people aren't aware of. You might tend to think the governor signs something into law and then boom, it happens right away. But that's not always the case.
And to underscore, this new legislation approved does not suggest that commercial hemp production is now open for business in Kansas. This is about researching first.
That's right. You'll have to, final rules aren't set, but the gist of it is you'll have to apply for a license, comply with that, and show the research component of what you're doing.
Very good. One last thing we want to cover here, Josh. It has to do with the state fair And the funding of the fair, it does take revenue to keep that important event going. Tied into the tax structure here in the state of Kansas, what has happened here?
Yeah, so this was another, I would call it a fun piece of legislation was able to work on. I'm obviously a large fan of the state fair. I've grown up going to it my entire life and get the opportunity now in my job. And we provide fiscal services at the state fair and just help a lot of outreach because we see them as a very important tool for telling the story of agriculture and great leadership development that comes with 4-H, FFA, and other pieces there. And, if you've been to the fair, you'll see there's a few buildings that are really in need of repair. I look at a great historic building, the Bison Arena, needs some major upgrades to allow them to continue to operate, meet fire code. The Expo Center, in fact, the State Fair's got a great master plan that really details these items out. And what's just really missing is a good, solid funding source to fund those repairs. Legislation introduced this year and passed, what that's going to allow the state fair to do is when you go to the state fair, whether you know it or not, you're paying sales tax when you buy your Pronto Pup. When you purchase anything that's normally subject to sales tax, you're paying a sales tax there. And what this does, doesn't impact the rate that you're paying at all, so you won't see any increased taxes through that. But what it allows the state fair to do is to keep the portion of just the state-only portion of the sales tax, less what comes out for the highway fund. They wanted to obviously keep KDOT funded through this, but we'll allow them to retain those funds for the purposes of capital improvement. So allow the fair to kind of make these needed repairs, and even if so desired, they could receive bonds for some long-term improvements through there. So I think will be a really good tool to kind of help them meet their goal and to continue to make the fair the largest agricultural classroom in the state.
Right. When you look at it in total, it's something of a hodgepodge of legislative pieces here, but would you consider this session a productive one for agriculture, Josh?
I really would. The agricultural industry made their priorities known and was a very successful session, and it's always great when the legislature can wrap up in a timely fashion. Here we are this early in May with the adjournment already, so I think it's another positive thing for everyone.
Well, Josh, thanks for the summary of all of this right here. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
We will talk again soon.
Thanks, Eric.
He is a Deputy Secretary of Agriculture with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Josh Rowe. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Agriculture Today is back now, and on to Kansas agricultural weather and our weekly update from Research and Extension climatologist at K-State, Mary Knapp. Well, Mary, this past week was open for field work, which was a plus for our producers, but there was a bit of early summer-like heat to go with it.
Right. It was a combination of warmer than normal temperatures, which we've kind of enjoyed, having been so cool in April. Statewide, we averaged probably somewhere between 8 and 9 degrees warmer than normal for the period, which allowed for that corn that's been in the ground to really pop up and make some progress. The unfortunate side is that if you were in an area that missed out on the rains, that's going to increase the stress on that wheat that's out there that's still struggling to make it to harvest. We did get some rain in the middle of the week in parts of central and actually east central Kansas, but it was extremely isolated. In Hodgman County, we had some reports over 1.25 inches. Similarly, over in Woodson County, there was 1.63 inches. But when you look at the divisional averages for those areas, southwest Kansas averaged 0.03 of an inch. So you had one place that got it and a lot of places that didn't. And unfortunately, as we move into the summer, that's kind of the nature of our storms. We'll get these pop-up thunderstorms. It can rain very heavily underneath that storm, but it might not be very wide in its coverage.
So as you look around the rest of the state and compare last week's moisture or lack of it to the norm, every other area was well behind likewise?
Yeah, the best it was in the Central Division where they averaged 0.28 of an inch, which is 32% of normal.
That was the best.
That was the best. And that was, again, the week ending yesterday. So that's not going to go very far towards making up our deficit. Year-to-date, statewide, we averaged 3.9 inches, and that's not even half of what we should have for it. If we look at the April to the present, which is, again, our beginning of our summer growing season, we're running a little bit better, 2.01 inches, but that's 49% of what we should have for the period. So it's not surprising that the drought monitor is still heavily painted with severe, moderate to extreme drought across the state.
Well, how much warmer than normal was this past week?
Well, when we look at the warmer, the Southwest, believe it or not, was actually the cool spot in that they averaged 68.4 degrees, which is about 7 degrees warmer than they should be, and that was the cool spot. In the Northeast, 70.1 for our mean temperature, and that was over 9 degrees warmer than average. So our lows have been in the more reasonable 40s. There are a couple of 30s in the western divisions as you get into those higher altitudes. But we're still just beginning to approach 90s for the highs. And again, when you're talking corn development, when you get up in the 90s, that's a little bit warm for the plant to do well. They like the temperatures in the mid-80s rather than into the 90s. So we're kind of in that trade-off. We won't accumulate growing degree units quite as quickly when we get into the 90s as we did in that earlier part of May where we were seeing highs in the 80s and lows in the 40s. So that's kind of ideal corn development.
Well, what's ahead then, Mary, as we look to the weekend and next week? It sounds as if we've more unsettled weather moving in and therefore added chances for rainfall.
Right. There are chances of rain just about every day. Unfortunately, the chances aren't particularly high. We're looking at a 30 to 40% chance for most of the period. The midweek, we get up into closer to 50% chance. Again, what we're likely to see is some of those isolated storms. Last week, we had that 30% chance that hit north central Kansas, and they got 2 to 3 to 4 inches of rain out of it. So again, some people will get it, but it won't necessarily be widespread. When we look at the quantitative precip forecast, they're calling for lightest amounts in the southwest, where they're looking at maybe 1/4 of an inch. But as you move into northwest Kansas and into the central areas, you're looking at closer to an inch. In northeast Kansas, we may see as much as 2 inches. Keep in mind that when you look at what we should be getting on a weekly basis, those amounts are also getting larger. In the southeast at this time of the year, you would expect about 1 1/3 inches for your normal. In the northeast, it's more like 1 1/10 inches. So again, it will take significant moisture just to make what we need on a normal basis, let alone making up for some of the deficits that we've accumulated to this point.
So it may tide us over until the next opportunity, which you say the updated forecast for the second half of May suggests potentially wet conditions.
Right. The updated forecast for May is for a slightly increased chance for wetter than normal statewide, and actually continuing down into Oklahoma and Texas. And we really are looking at that point because, again, if it's dry to our south, it's a sign that the Gulf moisture is not moving into the region, and that lessens the productivity of any of these disturbances that come through. The trade-off of that is that if we get a more disturbed pattern with some moisture in play, that also increases our chances for severe weather. We got through April with very little in the way of severe weather. We started May out with a bang as far as not just the tornadic activity that we had, but also hail and some high wind damage. So it's kind of a trade-off of potential beneficial moisture coupled with some potential for severe weather.
And a return to more normal temperatures in the coming days then?
At this point, no, the May outlook is for warmer than normal temperatures, and the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day are both tilted towards warm. Doesn't necessarily mean blistering hot, but again, it's going to be more on the warm side of the scale than on the cool that we enjoyed in April.
Well, more encouraging on the precipitation front as we get into this next week. Let's look for that. And Mary, we'll talk again with you next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Research and Extension climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp, on Kansas agricultural weather. And our thanks to you as well for being along with us. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.